And we're back. Hi, everybody. So this is going to be the last bit for HTTP. We're going to kind of round out the rest of the information. Um, we were talking before about e-tags and cache and all of that fun stuff, and we left off with security. Now, only one slide on security, and the reason why is that we do have security tags available for us, or sorry, security headers available for us. They tend to not get as much focus as rolling your own security for a lot of web applications. Typically, we're going to try and limit cross-site scripting attacks, clickjacking, things of that nature. Basically, you don't often see too many security headers kind of going through. Um, Typically, you're going to implement your own security protocols, right? Check for SQL injection, check for incorrect user actions, things of that nature. A lot of that's going to be application dependent. We can do some basic things from a server side perspective, but we're not necessarily going to go too deep into this here. So one other thing to talk about are sessions. Now, I kind of mentioned before cache, and I talked about cookies like they're part of the cache. They're not actually part of the cache, but they are kind of, related in a way. It's a nice, easy to digest example there. Kind of works well with cookie. But by default, HTTP tends to be stateless, right? At least HTTP 1. Now, the applications that you're making don't necessarily have to be stateless. We don't have to have zero concept of the client once our request is done and our response has been sent. One way to kind of get persistent information, outside of caching resources is to use a cookie or a session. Now, a cookie is going to be basically a key value pair that is stored on a machine. And again, I talked about GDPR in the last video. This is one of the things that you have to set on your, basically you have to inform users of what you are storing about them, right? Cookies are one of the blatantly obvious ways of handling that. Now, what is occurring is that the server is going to create a tiny little text file on your computer with a little bit of information. And it's going to have some attributes like how long is it alive for, when does it expire, is it secure, meaning that it has to be sent through HTTPS, otherwise it's not going to work. Basically, an easy little way for a browser to parse out information. Tends to be pretty locked down to your particular domain, so there used to be concerns about reading cookies from, server to server. Generally, it's pretty well locked down. Now, yes, you can read all the cookies on your computer visually if you want. Just pop open the text file, but it's intended to be small bits of information that are not really helpful to anybody, right? So, like, what is your username? Do you prefer dark mode over light mode? Are you in a particular time zone? Basically, to give the user kind of a nice little experience. We don't store passwords or anything like that inside cookies. Now, we can create sessions as well. People have in the past used cookies to store session IDs, which are absolutely terrible. Don't do that. We don't need to put protected information in cookies. Just use a session. PHP can create a session. IIS can create sessions. Basically, sessions are a lot more secure ways of keeping in track of the user, right? The idea here is let's personalize our site, or let's do a little bit of tracking. So which things did you click? Which pages did you view? How long were you in a particular area of a page? Effectively, again, just a little tidbits of browsing habits or browsing information that we're getting out of it, right? Cookies and sessions we'll talk about a little bit more in the future, but these are other ways to kind of store data. Now, I've been mainly talking about HTTP in terms of 1.0. I've kind of been sprinkling in persistent connections and things of that nature once we get to 1.1. Enhancements that we've had. So this is, again, kind of a historical perspective. We started out with 1.0, got 1.1, then we had 2, then we had Speedy, and now, or sorry, we had 1.1, Speedy, 2, getting towards 3 right now. One of the enhancements that we get out of 1.1 is virtual hosting. This is kind of a nice way to have one server host multiple domains. Basically, if I go to, let's say VM instances, here's my IP address. If I visit this IP, I could get any number of different websites based on how I am mapping it. Basically, if I send a different host name through the host header, I can get to a different web application. And it makes breaking up kind of like a big web application fairly nice. Or if I want to host multiple domains, just kind of depends on what we want to do. This is actually part of the Apache demo that I have you do. And I said, we're not going to do virtual hosting right now. It's a pain in the butt to configure Apache. Um, and I figured it wasn't necessary for at least our initial setup. All right. So other benefits of HTTP 1.1. So we have persistent connections. Now the idea is that a typical request response interaction is actually a little bit expensive from a TCP perspective. Right? If you remember back to TCP, I send a request, I get a response back acknowledging my request. Or sorry, I send a packet, goes to the host says, yes, I received it, sends a response back. Again, slightly expensive in terms of networking. Now, think of all of these connections kind of building up an HTTP request. Every one of these resource requests is a separate connection, meaning there's multiple TCP connections, meaning there's a lot of overhead that we have to worry about here. So the issue is basically network latency / processing time. How do we fix that? Let's make a persistent connection. So effectively what happens is that I open up a connection to the server, meaning I'm trying to visit your page, and we have a connection between us. And that is open until it's forcibly closed, rather than request response done. Now it's request response, request response, request response, request response done. Ideally, we're saving ourselves some processing and networking time. We have a pipeline that's going on. And again, this is on by default, unless you don't want it. So persistent connections, big improvement. HTTP 2 is starting to be envisioned in between, when we're at HTTP 1.1. Google comes along with the speedy protocol. Basically, we are getting in compression, we're getting in multiplexing, the ability for the server to push data to the client. Remember, all interactions are initially facilitated by the client. Here we're saying, hey, we have this pipeline. Let's let the server just push information. Okay. So this was our in between, and then we get to HTTP 2, which is basically speedy personified with some extra benefits too. So let's take a look at what this actually means. So again, Wikipedia image here. This is HTTP 1 by itself here, no pipelining. All right, so here's our TCP / HTTP request response style. Client wants something, server sends it back. Client wants something, server sends it back. Bop, bop. All right, look here. Here's all of these resources that I have to request in order for this particular page to render. Now, consider it from this perspective. Every single one of these has to happen in order. Not really efficient, right? But that was our initial attempt. So HTTP 1.1 comes along, we get pipelining. Client request, client request, client request, server response, response, response. All right, we can basically queue things up, and we don't necessarily need to wait for this response to come in. Okay, and just as a very simple visual here, this is handled a lot quicker than this one, just for 3 requests. Now, this is obviously abstracting a lot here, right? If we have dependencies, that is a possible issue. But in simplest fashion, we wait until we get everything and then we're done, okay? So let's add on a couple of other issues here. So we have our no pipelining. We have our pipelining. So this is the same view as the last slide, okay? Just a little bit expanded. There was an issue though. So we have this thing called head of line blocking. Now what this is that our first packet here is holding things up. All right, so the head of the line is actually blocking things. I'm just looking off screen here for a second. What we can do is we can optimize this even further, where basically Speedy comes along, and again, this is Google's stopgap. We're going to introduce a little bit more of an optimization called multiplexing to really allow the server to handle, multiple requests fairly efficiently. And I've got a link to this below as well for you to kind of dig into. Effectively, what we're getting into here, to give you another visual, is that let's say that I have 3 pictures that I want to receive. This is multi-connection versus multiplexing. Instead of sending them all separately, I'm just packaging them up and sending them as one request, simplifying things, right? So basically the idea is that we're trying to optimize even further, which is where we get with HTTP2. Okay. One of the other things I mentioned was the ability for the server to push. Now this is again, we started talking about AJAX a little bit, where the server can send data to the client through JavaScript, where let's say I have a chat application. I don't want to refresh the page every time I want to see what somebody else told me. I just want it to pop up on the screen. That's a push notification. For AJAX, we're injecting JavaScript, or we're using JavaScript to inject HTML. From the server side, we could do this with resources as well. It doesn't have to be just text. So, connection from the browser to the server. We have our persistent connection. We are at HTTP2. Let's follow this flowchart. I request page.html. I want to visit your website. Okay? Request response page.html. We don't have any further requests to the server here. The server is just going to push the style sheet, push the image. 1 request, 3 responses. Okay, so the server is basically in charge of sending information here. Now, what does this get us? This is going to be a little bit less sensitive to latency, meaning that we're going to not necessarily have too many concerns about connection speeds. We can manage that. If you have a slow connection, yes, it will be slower, but we don't have to worry about like dropped frames or dropped packets as much. This is effectively solving a lot of problems for us. All right. This is going to fix the pipelining issue and the head of line issue where we're blocking packets. And interestingly, this is going to reduce the number of connections we need per host. Again, we don't have to pop open a new connection every single time a request comes in. We're just going to use a similar pipeline. Interestingly, every single one of our interfaces, our content, our resource locators, again, our URIs, all of these schemes still are perfectly valid. We don't have to go back and revamp everything. We are just optimizing the underlying architecture. So this is a very nice improvement for us. Now, to give you an idea of where we are at, so I pulled this for this year. This is 2021. And this is basically a view of which websites, which content delivery networks are using which version of HTTP. HTTP? Okay. HTTP. Here we see the vast majority of them are using 2. Right? We still have some legacy applications using 1, right? So that's in the red here. Maybe they're legacy, maybe we have lazy system administrators who haven't updated things, right? But here we're seeing a vast majority of the web using 2. Again, one thing I want to really stress to you, this is how things are working under the hood. If you're just doing web development, you're probably not going to care too much, as long as your applications are simple. Once you start getting a little bit more complicated, this absolutely is required to understand. Okay, we are at HTTP 2. 3 is on the horizon. Okay, so we had Google Quick, which is effectively UDP connection oriented. Idea is to make our content browsing even faster, resource delivery even faster, handle connections that are quite slow. Basically, Quick is the speedy for our pathway to 3. All right. It is still a draft. It is not released yet, but it's probably coming soon. The last draft, honestly, was, yeah, so it's published in July 2021. It's probably going to be coming soon would be my expectation. Now, maybe something crops up and it doesn't come soon enough, but my guess is that you as web developers, web architects, whatever your role is going to be, you're probably going to be dealing with 3. So it's on the horizon. I would honestly recommend checking out quick to see how this is going to impact you. But still in draft, not finalized. We're not going to focus on it quite yet. Okay, that is it for HTTP. Please check the readings and the assignments. Drop by the open office hours. Drop by your open class hour. Say hi in Discord, whatever you want to do. But I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.